Joining us now to discuss the federal budget bill and its potential impacts is Tim Doescher, Executive Director at Unleash Prosperity, and Dave Hebert, a Senior Research Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Tim, Dave, good to have you both with us. I'll start with you, Tim. This budget bill includes significant deficit finance tax cuts and increased spending on defense and immigration, and it introduces new tariffs on imports. How do you see the impact of this bill on long-term economic growth and prosperity?
Well, thanks for having me on, Stephanie. And wow, that was a really negative overview of what this bill is. I mean, think about what we're doing here. I mean, first things first, put all this other stuff aside. We are staving off a $4 trillion tax hike, which will be happening on January 1st of 2026. That's happening, and this bill is preventing that. If you want to break that down even further, Stephanie, that's about $1,500 to $2,000 more in taxes for people like you and me and all the other folks in America. And then we're talking about cuts to healthcare, cuts to Medicaid, cuts. Well, from what I can see, all that we're doing is we're going after waste, fraud, and abuse. And so if somebody is wasting money or committing fraud or abusing a system, are they actually losing health coverage? That's my question. And I don't think that you can honestly look in the face of the American people and say, we must stand by waste, fraud, and abuse, all those things that you could probably prosecute in a court of law somewhere. So at this point, I think that this bill, while it's not perfect, we didn't get the 15% corporate tax rate. We didn't get it, several things. What you're doing is you're staving off, a loss of about 6 million jobs and 1.1 trillion in lost GDP, according to the National Association of Manufacturers. So this is a big deal if we don't get this done.
All right, Dave, your response.
Yeah, so, look, this bill has a lot of great provisions in it. There's no disputing any of that. My concern, as I've been concerned for a very long time, is that this is going to add to the deficit. This is going to add massively both to the deficit and to our national debt. The CBO's score that the debt will go up by $3 trillion is against their baseline that the debt will already go to $57 trillion. Now, look, we're at $36.3 trillion. The net interest on that debt is already larger than military spending and is projected to go up. I don't really want to live in a country where our number one spending priority is on servicing debt. That's just unsustainable. It's unwise. You can get rid of all the waste, fraud, and abuse. I fully support that. But until we get this Congress and this government back into fiscal shape, I really just cannot see the positives here.
And let's look now at the likely impacts on various demographics within the American society in regards to this, both spending cuts and spending increases. And we can also look at, reducing waste, fraud, and abuse and the impacts there. But Tim, to start with, it does look like there will be cuts to social safety net programs and increased spending on defense and immigration too. How do you see that impacting Americans?
Well, first of all, I want to go back to this point made about the CBO. If you live by the CBO and the Joint Committee on Taxation and the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, you will get nothing done if you are a conservative in this town. Everything they score against us is against us. There is no question about it. They were wrong in 2017. They were $1 trillion off, which that would have cost us the entire bill. We brought in so much revenue from growth, so much revenue from companies coming back here to America, the job growth, the tax revenue. It's the supply side. And I want to make sure that we do not lose the growth elements of this bill, because there are incredible growth elements that we lose if we let it expire and if we don't pass this. Now, I just wanted to push back because the CBO is never going to cut us a break on that. So if you live by that, you die by that. There's that. Now, in terms of your question about all the other stuff in this bill. Yeah, look, can you imagine back in 2017, 2018, the first term of President Trump, where we were fighting tooth and nail for $1.5 billion for border security? Now we're going to have, 50 billion for border security. We're talking about detention centers. We're talking about finishing the wall. We're talking about more ICE agents. One thing that I wish that we were talking about more of was establishing more judges for these immigration courts so we could get illegals out processed further and easier. These are the things that this enables us to do and opens the door for in the future. So, we won't want to just look at the tax elements and the budget elements of this. We want to look towards the very helpful things that we had a hard time doing in the first Trump administration, that we actually see a chance here to get across the finish line.
And Dave, your response on how this is all impacting Americans.
Yeah, so I mean, look, the score of this bill, from every perspective I can look at, is that it does enrich the already rich and it impoverishes the already poor. It's really hard to understand a system that rewards riches and punishes poverty. We want to try to alleviate and help the least advantaged in society. Now, this does not mean that we give them handouts or even hand-ups. What it does mean is that we force ourselves to not cripple their already crippled economic situation. Now, look, on net, I think the big, beautiful bill is a great bill. I don't want to come across as someone who's against this. But let's be real. This is going to saddle the American people with a tremendous amount of debt. You can die by the CBO score. You can use whatever budget scoring you want. No one is pointing to this as a net savings to the budget other than the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Presidential councils of economic advisors have been biased in the past under every single president. So we can point out that the CBO is flawed. That's fine. But let's also turn a non-blind eye to the Council of Economic Advisors and what assumptions they're making as well.
And I do want to get your response on that, Tim, but also we'll dig into the healthcare measures here, which encourage market, which I guess I'd like to find out from you whether you think what's currently in the bill will encourage market-driven solutions or perhaps destabilize the sector.
Yeah, well, look, in terms of the healthcare element of it, like I think that if you're fighting to stay at the where we are right now, if that's what your argument is, you're going to lose that argument every single time. Even people on Medicaid are not happy with the service that they have on Medicaid because there's so much waste, there's so much fraud, there's so much abuse in that system that it's diverting dollars away from providing better coverage, better providers, better services to people on Medicaid. If you're going to tell me that if you leave things the same and yet somehow magically Medicaid is just going to improve for consumers, you're dead wrong. It's impossible. We just don't have the money in the system to do that. So when you're talking about removing waste, fraud, and abuse, what you're really talking about is you're talking about giving an upgrade to people on Medicaid. You're talking about giving an upgrade to people who don't have the ability to afford health care and to provide that for their families and provide single mothers with children with the ability to get better care for their kids. That's what we're talking about here. Not a single person is talking about cutting a single person who needs this program. That's who we are as Americans. We take care of people who can't take care of themselves. But at the same time, we also say you have to help yourself before you get help as well. And so that is the big thing that we're hearing. So am I worried about people losing healthcare? No, I'm worried about people not getting better healthcare if we don't do something about this.
Dave.
Yeah, so I completely agree. What the big, beautiful bill is doing is it's essentially shifting more of the financial burden to the states and away from the federal government. In that regard, I actually think this is a great idea. Putting the money and the source of that funding closer to patients is a recipe for success. The one-size-fits-all of federal policy, as it turns out, fits almost no one. But 50 individual states making their own decisions about how to spend the money that they're collecting for Medicare and Medicaid, this is a great idea. My worry is that by pushing it to the states, that instead of passing additional spending at the state level, that is commensurate with cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, will fail. And in that regard, I do have some concerns. But again, on net, that would be the state legislature's fault, not the federal legislature.
Okay, and Dave, I want to dig into another aspect. Many economists warn that persistent deficit spending and rising debt can crowd out private investment and slow economic growth. Do you believe that the projected economic boost from tax cuts in this bill is likely to outweigh the negative effects of higher debt, or the other way?
Yeah, so look, this is a great question, and it's a deeply philosophical question. Is extending a tax cut itself a tax cut? Now, personally, I don't find it to be the same as extend as a tax cut that you knew a new tax cut. I find it to be continuing the same. Now, that provision, the fact that you're making it more stable and more long lasting, will have positive effects. The challenge again, though, is that when you have less revenue coming into the federal government, they're going to have to borrow more money, or they're going to have to find serious savings to offset the reduced income. And so if that's the case, the additional borrowing is going to crowd out private investment. What we need to be looking to do, and what I think conservatives of all flavors should be looking to do, is not starving the beast of resources. We need to have a serious and frank conversation about how to starve the beast of responsibility. The problem is that the federal government is too involved in our lives right now. And as a result, they have to fulfill the promises that they have made. Now, look, you don't succeed when you only half fulfill your promises. I want the federal government to shed responsibility and to do the things that they promised to do, the remaining things, better. That would be a pathway toward prosperity for all Americans.
And Tim, looking ahead, what alternative fiscal strategies would you recommend, if any, to achieve sustainable economic growth and fiscal responsibility, while also addressing all of the pressing national priorities that we have, obviously building on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse? But, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll say this, that when you're talking about the growth factors of this economy, Dave continues to talk about how this is going to add to the deficit, and he's right in the fact that we have an out of control spending problem in this country. We have an out of control addiction to federal largesse. Bottom line, though, with the tax bill, I can't understand why a Keynesian like Dave is talking right now versus a supply sider like me can't understand that when the CBO projected that we were going to lose $1 trillion, we actually brought in $1.5 trillion from this 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We had more money coming into the federal government than was ever projected that we were going to have. And then in addition to that, the rich only paid more taxes. In fact, they paid 46% of the entire tax burden. The rich paid more taxes after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So it was a tax cut for the middle class. So these Keynesian arguments of, oh, you're going to come in less, but we gotta pay attention to the CBO because you're going to debt and deficit, all this stuff. You're not taking into account the growth elements of this bill. And if we didn't extend this, we absolutely would lose that. We would lose the jobs. A job cut is less productivity in this economy and less growth. So any job that's cut because we lost the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that's less money that we have toward GDP. In fact, $1.1 trillion of lost GDP. That's even worse than not cutting a few additional pennies here and there.
And Dave, your response, and also what kind of alternative fiscal strategies you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I would just encourage Tim to Google my name real quick to see if I'm a Keynesian. My record is straight on this one. I am no Keynesian. I am a supply sider. But setting that aside, my point there was that continuing a tax cut is not a tax cut. It is maintaining the status quo. That, insofar as that's true, then that's not actually an expansion of an already cut tax. It's just continuing what we're already doing. That should have no real stimulative effect. Now, it will have some in the sense that it sets the precedent, but this is not a Keynesian point. That's a supply side point that I'm making. Now, in terms of alternative fiscal strategies, look, I support cutting taxes. I support leaving American people's money in their pocketbooks. The American people are the best spenders of their money. Congress is always going to be inferior to this. My challenge is that unless we are going to shed responsibility, we are not going to get onto a fiscal path toward actual success. And the American people, including my kids, my grandkids, and God willing, my great-grandchildren, are going to be saddled with the profligacy of this Congress and future Congresses.
A robust and important discussion at this time. Thank you so much, Tim Doescher and Dave Hebert. Good to speak with you both.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.